everyone. Welcome to the Double Blind Magic Hour, where we cover what's going on in the world of psychedelics, from insider baseball drama within the rapidly unfolding psychedelic movement to the latest news on research, politics, and beyond. For those of you who don't know me, I'm co-founder of Double Blind, a print magazine covering psychedelics, and today we're joined by our senior editor and a fantastic journalist who has been covering cannabis and psychedelics for a long, long time, Mary Carrion. Hey, Mary.
Hi, Shelby. How are you? Thank you for having me.
This episode is brought to you by Magnesium Breakthrough by Bioptimizers. Magnesium Breakthrough by Bioptimizers is the only full-spectrum magnesium supplement with 7 unique forms of magnesium that your body can actually use and absorb. And yes, you need all 7 forms if you want to sleep better, feel more relaxed, have healthier levels of blood sugar and blood pressure, lower inflammation, have strong muscles and bones, balanced hormones, and dozens of other benefits. Visit bioptimizers.com/doubleblind now and use promo code DOUBLEBLIND for 10% off any order. I'm really excited to have this conversation and to dive deeply into some of the really interesting stories that you have been reporting and editing for Double Blind lately.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. Let's get into it.
So before we talk about these stories, can you just tell people who you are? What's your story? I feel like it's a very unique trajectory to be a journalist that's covering specifically cannabis and psychedelics. There aren't many of us out there. So how did you come to be here?
Yeah, thank you. It is kind of a funky trajectory. It's not your typical, university pathway necessarily. I got started, I guess technically I got started back in 2011. That was when I got my first internship at OC Weekly. Eventually, years later, that morphed into a staff writing job at OC Weekly. But even when I got that job in 2016, I was so green. And also...
Pun intended?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, pun intended. Because
so green. I love writing and I love smoking weed.
I was so green. And also I got hired because I was so green. I'm saying I had an interview with my editor and I went to the wrong place. There were 2 locations of this cafe that I was supposed to meet my editor at the time, who was not my editor. Obviously at the time, he was a person I was interviewing with. And he told me to meet him at a specific cafe in Costa Mesa, but there were 2, but they're across town. And I went to the one in Costa Mesa and he was on the one in the outskirts near Santa Ana. I floored it over there, going 120 miles an hour. I swear to God. Ran over to him out of breath and was trying to be composed and was like, "Hi, how's it going? I'm Mary. I'm so sorry for being late." I sat down with him and we were talking, and then he asked me what I could write about. And I didn't know. I was like, oh my God, I don't even know what I can write about. And what came out of my mouth was weed. And at that moment, wow. I was like, I cannot believe I just said that. I have ruined this entire interview. I've ruined everything. I can't believe I just said that. I felt like I showed my cards way too hard, way too early. But ultimately, writing about cannabis and saying that in that moment is kind of what got me the job, because nobody else had mentioned everybody else interviewing for that role. Nobody else they didn't talk about cannabis. That was not something that they had even mentioned. However, cannabis in Orange County at the time was something that was about to pop off. They had already had the dispensary lotteries, which was a source of major drama at the time, stuff with Mayor Pulido at the time. He was taking bribes allegedly, and there were lots of juicy topics to be covered. And they didn't have anybody who was dedicated to that beat. And
so that was your dedicated beat, was weed in 2011?
No, that was in 2016. Once 2016. Once I got the staff job, that's when post internship. So they had kind of already knew me, but I didn't know this editor at the time. I just didn't know him from the previous internship. But yeah, in 2016, that's when I started reporting on cannabis. And that's what ultimately got me the job at OC Weekly. And I, of course, had to write about other things as a staff writer. I ended up also writing about music very frequently. I was a constant contributor to the music section at OC Weekly. And also, I also wrote about the environment, and I covered like local water politics, got deep into local water politics, which is like, trying to interact with like the mafia, essentially. Like, it is crazy water politics. I
know nothing about water politics.
Oh my God, it's fascinating. It's purposefully complex and complicated and designed for people to not really understand. But when you find a source who does know what's going on and they kind of inform you and tell you what the hell's going on, it is illuminating just how sus and sketchy everybody is who's actually involved in these decision-making like ideas and concepts and everything around the water that moves in and out of our cities and counties.
Yeah, 2016, that was very early to be writing about weed. I got my first gig writing about weed right before it became legal for adult use, which was that 2018?
2018, yes.
2018, I remember. So it's so funny that you met with this editor and he's like, what do you want to write about? And you said weed, because I was actually in the opposite. My story is the opposite, where I'd been smoking weed since I was 15 years old at music camp when, I was in a bathroom and some kids were like, want to smoke weed? And I was like,
I love
sure, I'll give it a try.
I love it.
10 minutes later, I'm high out of my mind, acting a fool.
Laughing hysterically, I'm sure.
Right. But I didn't want to write about weed. I wanted to write about music. I wanted to write about art. I wanted to write about politics. And, an editor, Drew Tewksbury, who actually writes for Double Blind now, an amazing arts writer.
Drew.
He was an editor at the time at LA Weekly.
LA
and he
Weekly,
had reached out to me and asked me if I would write about cannabis. And I was like, no, I don't want to write about weed. Like, I don't want to just be feels so embarrassing to say, but at the time I thought it just shows like how I was even though I was someone that was smoking weed, the stigma was seeped into my own perception too. Absolutely. Of the culture, where I was like, I don't want to be interviewing stoners all day. Like, that sounds so boring.
Totally.
But then he followed up again the night of the presidential election. And he said, we really need someone to go and cover this event, where it was a Prop 64 event where they were going to be watching the votes come in.
Yeah. And
I was
there.
Like, oh, you were? And I was like,
I was there.
I was like, all right, I need work. I'll go. And I went, and I was like, oh, it's not a room full of stoners. It's a room full of activists,
politicians,
lawyers,
politicians, totally.
Like every single, and that's where we are in psychedelics now, right? Where we're starting to see that every single job that exists outside of psychedelics is starting to exist within psychedelics, because we need publicists, we need lawyers, we need activists, we need journalists. All the people that exist in other industries need to exist within psychedelics in order to legitimize it as a movement and as an industry.
It's been the most fascinating part and the most pleasant, actually, part of reporting on, starting with cannabis and then from cannabis kind of shifting into psychedelics, which was a very natural shift of events. It was like reporting on one story about veterans in cannabis that I realized that many of these veterans were also eating mushrooms as well. And I was like, oh, got it. Okay, cool. But like in reporting about these plants, about fungi, about everything, I realized so quickly that all of this touches so many other areas of life. Like reporting on cannabis is in turn reporting about politics. It's reporting on science. It's reporting on healthcare. It's reporting on the war. It's reporting on the drug war. It's reporting on veterans. It's reporting on senior citizens. 100%. It's reporting on everything. And same with psychedelics. It's the same exact thing. And I love being able to use these substances as a lens to look at our society and also see the injustices that come along with all of these things, which is so sad that it's still that way. But here we are. And that's why we do what we do, I suppose.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, my story is the same. I was writing about cannabis. I was telling some interesting stories. I was enjoying it. But really that aha moment of this is what I want my beat to be was when I went to a drug policy reform conference. I think it was the Drug Policy Alliance's conference in Atlanta, Georgia. And I realized if I talk about drugs, I get to talk about everything.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to talk about all the most prescient issues in our society, and which is why I couldn't pick a beat, right? A beat is, for those of you who don't know, it's the topic that if a journalist decides to be sort of an expert in one particular topic and focus on that topic. And so I was like, oh, drugs are my beat. And guess what? That makes sense because I've been smoking weed since I was 15 years old. Anyway, I'm really excited to get into some of the stories that you've been reporting and editing for us lately. But before we do that, we're going to take a quick break. This episode of the Double Blind Magic Hour is sponsored by Fungi. Fungi chocolates and fruit chews are an alcohol and psychedelic alternative activated with Kanna. They're perfect for the newly sober or for people that are interested in trying a psychedelic adjacent plant. At Double Blind, we're very passionate about the fact that there's a lot of romanticization of these bigger psychedelics, these scheduled substances, whether it's MDMA, psilocybin, LSD, but there's actually a whole apothecary of legal plants and fungi that come from the earth that are beautiful for connecting with yourself, connecting with other people. I've tried Fungi's chocolates. I did them the other day in the backyard with my friend. It was just the kind of gentle stimulant and euphoria that I was looking for. In addition to the Kanna, the Fungi chocolates have cordyceps, aphrodisiacs such as Damiana, and a gentle stimulant to activate the experience, which is called guarana. The Fungi fruit chews are dosed at half of a chocolate serving, giving you more flexibility in how you build your dosage. So strength-wise, 2 of their fruit chews equals 1 chocolate triangle. I had 1 chocolate triangle the other day. With Kanna, they're able to provide a sort of similar instant magical effect to psychedelics. You can kind of think of it like a microdose of MDMA. Kanna also pairs well with other substances such as mushrooms, cannabis, caffeine. If you want to check out Fungi's Kanna chocolates, then you can get 25% off of your first order. Just use the code DoubleBlindPod at fungi.com. That's FUNGUY, I can spell.com. Thanks for listening. So for those of you who don't know, Double Blind began as a print magazine, and it's still at the heart of what we do. I spent my whole career as a journalist before starting Double Blind, reporting on psychedelics, cannabis, and drug policy more broadly for Rolling Stone, Vice, LA Weekly, Quartz. I did just about everything in journalism. I worked at CBS News, covering breaking news, a major newspaper, small media startups, and if you haven't heard, journalism is in crisis. But we started Double Blind anyway because we believe in the value of good journalism to educate and hold stakeholders accountable. We saw what happened in cannabis. Pioneers who put their lives on the line to get patients access to the medicine they needed, getting left behind because they didn't have the capital to compete in the newly regulated market. We've seen what's happened in mental health care and healthcare more broadly, whereby millions of people are suffering, don't trust their doctors, can't afford proper care, and just don't know what to do to get well. In our print magazine, we feature essays, investigations, photojournalism, and much more by world-class journalists who are going everywhere from the ayahuasca tourism industry in Peru to laboratories at leading universities. We're supporting people like you on their journey with psychedelics, and we're covering this movement as it unfolds. This is all made possible by our members who, in exchange for their support, get direct access to psychedelic experts to help them on their journeys of healing and growth, workshops, and a subscription to our beautiful print magazine. Subscribe today at doubleblindmag.com/membership. So first up, we're going to talk about a very juicy story that you wrote for our 10th issue on how psychedelics can fuel right-wing extremism and conspiracy theories. And I feel like this is such an interesting and important story. I don't think we've ever actually published a story that riled people up more than this one, which we kind of knew was going to happen. Like you were a little scared to put it on social media because...
I know.
Yeah. So just for some context, a lot of times people think at Double Blind that we're a pro-psychedelics organization, but actually we identify as a journalistic outlet, first and foremost, which means that we cover the good, the bad, and the ugly of the psychedelic industry. We're not just here to tell everyone to do psychedelics and that if they do psychedelics, their lives are going to transform for the better and the planet is going to be saved and all of humanity's problems are going to go away, because we really don't think that it's that simple. So Mary, why don't you tell us a little bit more about just the premise of this story?
It's endlessly fascinating to me from like a case study perspective, from a journalistic perspective, from a reporting perspective. And essentially the piece starts off with the premise being that it's a common misconception about psychedelics that they kind of bestow people with a liberal or progressive politics and ideology. And the story ultimately kind of proves that, like, no, that's not exactly the case ultimately. You know, psychedelics are a non-specific amplifier. So they're going
As
to kind of...
Stanislav Grof said.
Absolutely. And so therefore, they're going to kind of amplify either what is already going on inside of you. It's going to amplify whatever content you are taking in. It's going to amplify the influences that you are experiencing, who you surround yourself with, etc. And when you're in a ceremony space, oftentimes whatever is being said, whatever lessons are being taught, whatever the people who are in ceremony with you, your like co-ceremony partners, whatever they are talking about, whatever ideas they are sharing are going to kind of enter into your psyche in a very deep way and can deeply influence you on an intense level. And that could be anything. It's not just right-wing ideology, of course. It's not just conspiracy theories. It could be anything. It could be caring about the planet. It could be music. It could be
love and light.
It could be love and fucking light. It could be the live, laugh, love. You know, it could be anything. It could be whatever. And
any slogan you see on a bad art at Marshall's.
Yeah, exactly. And the psychedelic ceremony world, unfortunately, was just particularly rocked hard by conspiracy theories like QAnon or QAnon adjacent conspiracy theories like Pizzagate and Hillary's emails and everything. Like even before the pandemic, it was already kind of this way, but the pandemic obviously set it on fire. It created this idea of plandemic. And, you know, I don't know. I like it's difficult to say. I don't have all the answers to everything. I'm just reporting on the situations and things that I saw and that were very common that other people were experiencing too. Like, look, maybe it is all planned. Who fucking knows? But also at the same time, we don't have any proof of that one way or the other. We just know how it impacted people's lives, their relationships, and how ostracized many of these people became. And that's scary. So one of the largest medicine circles in Southern California experienced a dramatic falling out, leaving many people feeling very disillusioned by the people and culture they thought they knew, because there was a massive divide, as we all experienced in one way or the other. But in a ceremonies circle, the reason why that's extra intense is because there are medicines involved that take you to a much deeper, crazier place. And the relationships that you build with people when you go on these massive journeys are intimate relationships. And you know how it is when something like an ideological difference comes between you and somebody else, it makes you see them completely differently. So, you know, that's ultimately the basis of this story. And yeah, the story goes very deep into just kind of the history, the long sordid history between psychedelic use and conspiracy theories and right-wing ideology. And basically, there is a slide, essentially. Like, you start at the top of the slide taking the psychedelic, and then you kind of go down the slide into a conspiracy theory. And if you go even deeper, it can often end up into some area of politics, whether that's right, whether that's left, whether that's completely off of the political spectrum of what we're used to. But oftentimes there is a political agenda attached to many of these conspiracy theories, and that is impossible to ignore.
Yeah, it is. This is such an intense topic, and it's also a really personal one for me.
Yeah.
For
all of us.
Right. Being a journalist that writes about these things, but also being someone that takes psychedelics, that sits in ayahuasca ceremonies. And I think, you know, one of the catalysts for the illumination of the ideological divides within ayahuasca circles was masking and testing, right? Because a lot of people that thought that COVID was not real, the pandemic people that thought that it was a conspiracy for big pharma to make money or, you know, to control us through vaccinations, did not wanted to just keep doing business as usual. They wanted for people to keep sitting in ayahuasca ceremonies, 12, 15, 20, sometimes more people, 30 people plus in an enclosed environment where you're vomiting oftentimes and you're coughing and you're laughing and you're crying. I mean, let's just be honest. Ayahuasca ceremonies, bodily fluids are everywhere. And so there were people that wanted to just keep doing business as usual. And there were other people that were calling for masking at ceremonies, testing before ceremonies, putting a pause on ceremony altogether. I thought it was just so interesting when we put this story out on Instagram, because we really saw how this divide, this ideological divide, lives within the double-blind community and lives within the internet more broadly. So we had people like our friend and content creator, Emily Eaglin, who does a lot of videos on psychedelics on YouTube. We had her supporting us saying, thank you for this conversation. Such an important convo, DB. Solidarity with disabled and immunocompromised folks is tangibly lacking in so much of community, is what she said. And someone else said something similar. They said, psychedelics are a non-specific amplifier, kind of what you're talking about, period. Whether they create anything else from world peace or indulgence in conspiracy is up to the person and how they integrate it. Their meeting of the phenomenology revealed and what they choose to do with it, consciously or not. But then we had a ton of people on the other side of the spectrum defending their anti-vax perspectives and saying COVID was not real, a plan to make money, George Floyd's death was a conspiracy theory, even talking about things like how we've all been lied to about UFOs. So shit got pretty crazy on our Instagram page. We had people saying things. We had one person that said, and this is exactly why the pandemic was so important to the powers that be. It was a way to disrupt these types of organizations, I'm assuming they mean double blind, from within, brother against brother, sister against sister. It's brilliant but sinister. A lot of people called the article trash. They said they lost faith in double blind. They said they were unfollowing us. So I also want to name that we had more comments on this story than we had, far more comments on this story than we had people who actually read the story. So that also speaks to a systemic issue in the world today, whereby people are reading headlines, they're trolling media companies on social media, and they're never actually reading the story.
Yes, absolutely. You know, my DMs went off that day that it went live on Double Blind.
Oh, they did?
Oh, they went off. They went off. I was
attacked. Did anyone get mad at you?
Oh, yes. I mean, that's like many people who commented on the Double Blind Instagram post also came into my DMs to tell me that I need to get out of my default mode network and that I need to take more psychedelics. I need to do many things, including a few very harsh things. I mean, I don't know. I didn't really take them offensively because, you know, like one of the messages was for me to go back to the country I'm from. But like, I'm from the United States. I'm from Southern California. You know, okay, I'll go back to Orange County, I guess. But you know, I'm not.
I'll go that's back like to 30 Orange County, the land
30 minutes
the land
away.
Of Republicans, the Republican haven amidst.
Exactly. I'm like, you realize
a liberal. Yeah.
I'm like, you realize you're asking me to go back to the place where there are a bunch of you here. Like, yeah. Okay.
So I will say though that I had a journalism mentor at Columbia named Nick Lemon, longtime reporter and editor at The New Yorker, who often said to us, this is not the definitive story. And he would always say that to us to remind us that there is no way that one story or even a book or even a series of books can ever encompass every angle, every perspective, every quote. That being said, I will say that there was some feedback that we received from readers, and we do appreciate critical feedback because
Absolutely.
we're not perfect.
Absolutely.
B, in transparency, we're not, I mean, in case you didn't know this, we're not the New York Times, so we don't have the luxury of spending, a year on something and sending Mary into the field to sit with in ayahuasca ceremonies and interview 500 academics. I mean, she did a fantastic job with what we were able to give her, and the space that she had in the magazine. But one of the pieces of criticism we got was, why are you tying conspiracy theories, and specifically conspiracy theories in the psychedelic community, to right-wing extremism when we see conspiracy theories on the left too? And so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that. Was that, we call it a hole sometimes in reporting, was that a hole that you sort of identified as you were writing, or you just thought it was kind of beyond the scope of the story?
Well, it's interesting because I understand and I recognize that there are conspiracy theories on the left, and I know that the right, most of the more right-leaning conspiracies tend to be about the chaos that the left is causing. So, and there is some element of truth. There is some rice grain of truth to many conspiracies. They start somewhere. There is something, and it's, there is an inception point. There is a conception point even. I would say that in my reporting, it was specifically about what was happening in the pandemic, specifically in the ayahuasca ceremony world. And in that world specifically that I was reporting on, it wasn't necessarily left-leaning conspiracies that were rampant through that space. And as a journalist, focusing on one element instead of focusing on 6 or 7 elements, which I still had to do, in that story, I still had to focus on how the conspiracy theories also kind of meander and everything, and how these ideas meander into many other areas, including politics, including history, including video games, including many other areas, QAnon, the insurrection, this issue touched many different parts of society, as kind of what we were talking about earlier. This story wasn't just about conspiracies. It was about many other things that conspiracies also sort of bled into, specifically during the pandemic, specifically originating in the ayahuasca ceremony world. And in that world, again, it wasn't the left conspiracy. It wasn't left conspiracies, I guess. And that's kind of why that wasn't really a focus in this piece. However, that said, I am fully aware that there are equally, if not more, insane people on the left as well. When we talk about liberals and we talk about conservatives and we talk about the right and the left and all of that, everybody's existing on the same spectrum, on opposite ends of that spectrum, and at varying degrees on that spectrum, and both of which are equally insane. If you are giving all of your power over to politics and you are giving all of your power over to the powers that be, you are already lost. You are already in the greatest conspiracy theory of all time, And, at the same time, when we look at the things that went down in 2020, I don't know if, I just don't know, when you look at the insurrection, for instance, I don't know if necessarily that was the left. Of course, when you talk to people who are Republican or right or whatever on that side of the political spectrum, they would probably say that it was Antifa. That's just how it goes. And there's no way to ever convince anybody of, of what I'm trying to do, or what, whatever. There's no way to convince anybody.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's so tricky because I think as journalists, what we really want to do at least what I aim to do based on sort of the gold standards of journalism, dating back to, you know, the 19th century when the newspapers first became a thing, is that we don't want to reinforce ideological echo chambers, but we really want to encourage people to question their own perspectives and to engage in what we at Double Blind refer to as compassionate critical discourse. And so it's challenging because sometimes it feels like no matter what you do, you're just going to be preaching to the choir. Like everyone is reading through a lens of cognitive bias, and they want what they already believe to be reaffirmed
Absolutely.
by the media that they're reading. And that's not our job at Double Blind, is to make people happy or to tell them that we agree with them. It's to report on a variety of perspectives and a variety of things that are unfolding within the psychedelic movement, some of which are really tricky, some of which are really nuanced. You know, like, I think one of the trickiest things about this story that we haven't talked about yet, but that we should talk about is how do we, I mean, this is really more of an existential question than a journalistic one, but how do we know what truth is? It's a journalistic question and it's an existential one because
Absolutely.
Because one of the so in a lot of the research that's investigating the therapeutic potential of psychedelics at Johns Hopkins and Yale and NYU, et cetera, et cetera. I know you know this, Mary, but for our listeners who don't, they oftentimes, after a person has a psychedelic experience, they give them something called the Mystical Experience Questionnaire, which is a survey that was created for people actually having mystical or divine experiences not occasioned by psychedelics. I think it was created by a theologian, but don't quote me on it, before the psychedelic renaissance. And basically what it does is it assesses the degree to which someone had a mystical experience, which can happen on a psychedelic, can also happen through fasting, through prayer, through chanting, through a variety of different modalities that have nothing to do with putting a substance into your body. And one of the things that defines a mystical experience is the noetic quality. The noetic quality being when you experience something, you, in your core, fundamentally, universally think that it's true. And you're not going, did I see God? You're going, oh, goodness, there's God. I see him, them, her, whatever your preferred pronoun is for a divine entity. But, and sometimes people, oftentimes actually, when they're on a psychedelic, they have noetic revelations about their life that people who the status quo would deem to be, it's just so tricky with the languaging here, but people who the status quo would deem to be sort of healthy and grounded. Again, I don't know what words to use.
I know,
but
it's hard. It's really hard to talk about.
Let's call it a, your friends and family who you trust, a therapist who you've worked with for a long time, who is sort of generally considered to have integrity. That all of these people would listen to you say, "This is the revelation I had," and they would go, "That's a great revelation." For example, I've been smoking. I think most people can get behind this one. I've been drinking a bottle of wine every night for 3 years, and I haven't been able to stop, even though I've known that it's hurting my sleep, it's hurting my digestive system, it's affecting the relationships I have with people who I love. And when I was on mushrooms, what the mushrooms told me is that I don't spend enough time caring for myself. So at the end of the day, I feel like I need to drink a bottle of wine to relax. And now I know that that's what the root of my alcohol dependence is. And so I'm going to sleep more. I'm going to drink more water. I'm going to exercise in the middle of the day. Most people are not going to go, that's a harmful revelation.
Right.
Right?
Absolutely.
And then there's stuff all the way on the other end of the spectrum, whereby someone has a revelation that's encouraging them to behave in ways that are often considered kind of red flags for someone having joined a cult. right? And sort of there are some like criteria that academics agree upon that these are the criteria that distinguishes this group of people or this ideology from being just a community versus a cult. And one of those things is neglecting yourself and your basic needs. So you're no longer sleeping, eating, drinking water the way you should. Another is that you are cutting ties with people who have been in your life for a long time, who love you. So like your parents and your best friend and maybe your partner, because suddenly none of them understand you anymore, or none of them know the truth and you do. Right? And then there's a lot in the middle. And that's where things get really tricky.
Absolutely.
And we know that there are things that we should all be critical about that perhaps are considered, like, for example, we know that Western doctors within the Western medical paradigm overprescribe antibiotics. We know that it's not great to take antibiotics unless you absolutely have to take antibiotics, because in addition to wiping out the bad stuff, it wipes out the good stuff, and that's not so great for your microbiome, and you can build up resistance term, right? So how do we sort of, when we're doing psychedelics and just more broadly questioning critically our ideologies, how do we do that? Where does truth lie? What is the barometer for reasonability? And when you add psychedelics to the mix and people are having these moments where they're like, I am so deeply sure of my truth, even if no one else agrees with me, what are you supposed to say?
Nothing. Like nothing. I don't know. Like, and that's also why I wrote this story too, because it was a way for me to also explore this fundamental issue of what is truth. You know, because everybody at the end of the day is also looking for this right way. You know, everybody's looking for the correct path to walk down, and maybe everybody's truth is different. Multiple truths can exist also at the same time. I think that in terms of like personal safety for your mental health, and there is something to be said about the impact of some of these conspiracy theories on people's mental health, and how that is starting to impact your relationships with other people, how that is impacting the way that you are caring for yourself, how that is impacting the types of content that you are consuming, and how that is making you feel. Everything. All of that needs to be taken into consideration. If you have a revelation, feel that something is your truth, there needs to be time sat with that, I think, as a way to care for yourself and to ensure that what you're feeling is real. Because sometimes something can feel so real, and then 2 months later you look back on it and you're like, meh, I don't really care anymore. Or like,
yeah,
I don't really want to do that.
I really appreciate you bringing that up, because that's sort of tripping 101, right? And we'll get into more of our trip tips later in the episode, but Tripping 101, what sort of the gold standard is that the industry psychedelic movement agrees on, from underground facilitators all the way to therapists and principal investigators that are working at universities, is integration is the name of the game. Integration being that period of time following a psychedelic experience where you are processing what happened for you and you are integrating the lessons of the experience into your life. And so, you know, they basically say, unless you realize that, you know, something that is happening in your life is acutely harmful, like you're in an abusive relationship and you need to get out of it right away, don't make any big decisions right after a psychedelic experience. And certainly not during a don't call mom, don't call your ex, just sleep,
chill. Just chill.
Take care of yourself. Exercise,
have some water and chill.
Have some water. Yeah. No one's going to tell you having some water is a bad idea.
Or going to the beach, or just like, you know, chilling on that, or writing it down on paper, however you need to process it, start processing it, you know. And I think also what is another practice that isn't really talked about too much, but something that at least helps for me when I've done big journeys and I feel either unsettled afterwards, or I feel very confused about a situation that I had previously gone through, or maybe my role in a situation that made something worse or made a relationship go sour or something, like different viewpoints can often come to you during a psychedelic experience about different situations that you've gone through in the past. And it kind of makes you see things a little bit differently, which can be super confusing. But also, if other things come to you, like about, I don't know, the mainstream media or whatever it possibly, whatever triggering crazy ideas or whatever comes to you, it's important to also talk to people with differing opinions than yourself to try and get to that truth. Like, if you feel one way about vaccines, if you feel one way about masking, if you feel one way about the pandemic, if you feel certain ways about, I don't know, whatever else it could possibly be that was going on during the pandemic, talking to people who have differing opinions than yours is going to help you kind of move closer to the truth a little bit, because there's always something to be taken from the other side, no matter what. And it's hard to talk to people with differing opinions, especially today, because on social media, where many of us spend our time, we are in echo chambers that only reinforce the things that we already believe, and it makes us feel good, which is part of the whole addicting quality of social media. However, what the hell? We're not expanding our minds. We don't need psychedelics to expand our minds necessarily, but we can expand our minds by talking to other people, by interacting in person or over the phone or on FaceTime, talking to other people, our friends, family members, whatever, who have differing opinions, so that we can learn. And that has been something that I have been endlessly trying to do, literally since the pandemic, trying to understand what the fuck is going on. Excuse my language, but truly, there was no way that even me, as a naturally extremely critical individual, wasn't also feeling like WTF, like WTF tattooed on my forehead, that's how I felt. And many of us felt that way. And my journey with psychedelics has also been accompanied by talking to people who have differing opinions than mine, so I can at least try to understand, begin.
Yeah. Amen. And I just want to kind of wrap this topic up too by saying, we are not trying to diminish or minimize anybody's perspectives. And, I might get in trouble for saying this, but I'll say that I really do try to put myself in everybody's shoes. I know the vaccine stuff is really touchy, but I'm not, I understand why people were skeptical of the vaccine.
It's hard not to be.
Because it was rushed through the FDA. And the FDA does have a history of approving things that, in retrospect, they shouldn't have approved. Meanwhile, psilocybin, cannabis, and other substances that we know have therapeutic and medicinal potential are still on Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act with no medical use and a high potential for abuse. So I understand. And we really are here to have critical conversations, critical, compassionate conversations with everybody. That is at the heart of why we're doing what we're doing. With that said, we have a couple more stories coming up in a moment. I'm looking forward to getting into those with you, but first we're going to take a quick break. This episode is brought to you by Psyched Wellness. Psyched Wellness is on a mission to bring people the healing magic of Amanita muscaria mushrooms with their product Calm. If you haven't heard, there has been a growing number of folks who are exploring the prospect of Amanita muscaria extracts in small doses for anxiety. And Amanita muscaria is not a scheduled substance in the United States, unlike psilocybin. So it's something that more and more people are exploring, getting interested in, and it's something that Psyched Wellness is devoted to. There's some things about Calm specifically that are unique and worth noting. So firstly, it's a natural made supplement made with handpicked Amanita muscaria mushrooms. I'm going to say that's important because there are a lot of supplements where you don't know where they're getting their ingredients. You don't know where they're getting their sources. And so it's really important when you're embarking on a journey of taking a new tincture, taking a new supplement, that you really know that you are purchasing a product that is made with care, made with intention. You know where they're getting their ingredients. Some of the benefits are that this Amanita muscaria extract may promote better sleep and may help you wake up feeling more rested without feeling groggy. It also may provide physical and mental stress support, which is something I know a lot of us are needing at this particular moment. So if you're curious about adding some calm to your life, you can check them out at psyched-wellness.com and use code DOUBLEBLIND for 10% off at checkout. Okay, so next up, a study was published in Nature Scientific Reports recently, and it found that psychedelics like mushrooms and LSD may improve sexual function. The findings are mostly based on a survey of 261 participants before and after taking psychedelics. And researchers from Imperial College London's Centre for Psychedelic Research combined those responses with results of a separate clinical trial that compared psilocybin and a commonly prescribed SSRI for depression. The authors say it's the first study to explore the effects of psychedelics on sexual functioning, and the authors found that respondents typically experienced improvement in sexual function for as long as 6 months after a psychedelic experience, including enjoyment of sex, sexual arousal, satisfaction with sex, attraction to their partners, their own physical appearance, communication, and their sense of connection. And interestingly, there were also significant changes in people seeing sex as a spiritual or sacred experience. So we recently published a story on this. Mary, you edited it. What do you have to say about this?
I would like to shout out Marijuana Moment because this is a story where it originated from. Shout out to Kyle Yeager, everybody over there. Shout out to y'all. I actually have many thoughts about this. One is that an important facet of this study and what the researchers noted is the fact that the study was not looking at people on psychedelics having sex like at the same time. It looked at the effects after a psychedelic experience on people's sex lives. So a week after they had their journey, that was the point in which the researchers were looking at how their people's sex lives were affected. So understand that perhaps consent can be an issue on psychedelics when you are going to have sex,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, consent is an issue there. And also, I don't think that would be an ethical study model. So there's that. So I just want to put that forward for everybody to understand that if you are trying to improve your sex life, perhaps waiting till after the journey is done, then you can start kind of trying to manage or replicate any of these things or seeing if psychedelics impact your sex life in that way for you, moving forward. But another aspect of this study that I also found interesting is just the fact that this isn't really a topic that is studied too much in the media or in the scientific literature and reported on in the media. Oftentimes, all of this information just kind of is overlooked. And that's why Double Blind is awesome, because Double Blind is one of the only places that does report on it. And also, again, shout out to Marijuana Moment, also reporting this. And yeah, there are many aspects of this study that I found interesting. Also, just that like depression, like anxiety, it's afterwards. It's the after effects of the psychedelic. And also one of the main reasons why people's sex lives were improved is because of a reduction of anxiety long-term, is because of the reduction of depressive symptoms long-term as well. So all of these things, as we know, do impact our sex lives. They can impact our ability to connect deeply with other people. And when you take mushrooms or you take a psychedelic, oftentimes those are the things that can start being healed or being treated in our mental health that impacts our ability to connect with others. So I love that. And I think that there's a lot of healing benefits that do come with consuming the correct dose of mushrooms and the correct dose of LSD, and obviously in the right set and setting and everything. And yeah, connection is everything. And that's one of the best things about psychedelics is that they are the ultimate connectors. So, also be careful. Be careful with that, Be careful with how you are using these things to connect. And I like this study. I think it's really great that people are looking at this stuff. And I can't wait to see how this study progresses forward and how further studies build on this.
Yeah. I mean, so firstly, I think it's interesting and also kind of funny that the lead author, I wrote down the quote here because I thought it was funny. He said, quote, "We found a relationship between increased sexual functioning and overall well-being." I'm like, I mean,
I know.
sometimes scientists just say things that are so inherently obvious. I'm like, we don't need a survey. We don't need a clinical trial to know that if you have a better sex life,
better well-being.
You're gonna be happier and healthier. But I do think this point about the psychedelic isn't necessarily directly treating the sexual functioning, but what it's doing is it's treating underlying mental health conditions that cause people to have difficulty connecting sexually with themselves and others is important. Because I remember it was in 2019 that Double Blind actually launched at the World Ayahuasca Conference in Girona, Spain. And I ran into Rick Doblin there, who is the founder of MAPS. For folks who don't know, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies is one of the primary organizations that has been researching psychedelics. They've placed a big emphasis on MDMA and getting MDMA approved for post-traumatic stress disorder. And I approached him at the conference and I said, well, what about ayahuasca? Because here we are, we're at the World Ayahuasca Conference. And I said, why would someone do ayahuasca versus psilocybin versus ketamine when all of these substances are showing promise for many of the same conditions? Substance dependence, depression, anxiety. Also, how is it that like one substance, mushrooms, LSD, ketamine, can treat so many different conditions, right? Because that's not typical that we see that sometimes a drug is approved for one thing and then it's prescribed off label for something else. But we don't often see one drug treats 12 different conditions or an infinite number of conditions. And, basically what he said to me and what I've heard a lot of other people say in the psychedelic community is it's because mental health diagnoses, as we understand them in the DSM, which is the kind of the manual that psychologists and psychiatrists use to diagnose people with conditions like anxiety, depression, and etc., are kind of arbitrary. Like, actually, what's happening on a deeper level is some kind of internal distress that's manifesting as symptoms that we're saying, well, you have depression, you have anxiety, you have sexual dysfunction. So if we can treat the root cause of the internal distress, then it has potentially outward positive impacts on all the areas of our lives. And of course, human beings, most of them, I don't want to diminish that there are some people who are asexual and they don't have a desire to connect with people in a sexual way, but most human beings, sex is a very important part of living a healthy, whole, happy life. So that's something that I thought was really interesting. Something else I wanted to talk about that you had addressed early on was, what was it? My brain's not working. You said, I remember now, you said, you wanted to make sure people understood that this study is about the impact that a psychedelic journey has on sex after the journey. Well, I just want to say yes on consent. And we have done, if you're going to combine psychedelics and sex, and we've done workshops and seminars and things on psychedelics and sex at Double Blind because we know it's something people are interested in and that they want to explore. And there just doing isn't a lot of places they can get information on it. And they're doing it already. Most of the experts we've spoken to about this have pointed to actually sort of like principles from the BDSM community around consent. Because the BDSM community has a lot of, amazing sort of principles, values, processes for making sure that you and your partner or partners are on the same page. And that if at any time you're no longer on the same page, that there's easy ways to communicate that and that those boundaries are respected. But I'm not going to say psychedelics while having sex is a no-no for everyone, because we know that some people do it and we know that some people benefit from it. But what I will say is sex makes you vulnerable. Psychedelics make you vulnerable. So
be careful.
combining them probably going to make you super vulnerable, which means you really have to think about who you're doing it with. Make sure that you feel 100% safe with them. Make sure you're on the same page about what your intentions are. And intentions are important always, but especially when you're thinking about doing psychedelics for the purposes of improving your intimacy with another person, whether that's sexual, emotional, psychological, or all of the above. Because oftentimes what we find out when we're on a psychedelic is that we thought the problem was the other person, or we thought the problem was our relationship and our dynamic with the other person, but actually it was just something that needed to be healed within. And especially when it comes, and so again, we don't have a lot of clinical data backing this up. This is the first study that we've really seen that's trying to put some kind of science to all of the anecdotal reports about combining using psychedelics for sexual intimacy, whether it be during sex or just, hoping to see benefits afterward. But we do know that, at least from the anecdotal reports, that a lot of people struggle with sex because they have trauma around sex and being touched, or they are dealing with some kind of repression that is inherited from our culture, right? Like specifically in the United States, as we call it today. Another discussion. Our culture is imbued with puritanical roots that have caused a lot of repression, specifically within folks that identify as women.
Tough. Yeah.
So there's a lot happening there psychologically for people around their inability to relax and enjoy sex that psychedelics, I'm not going to say can help with or will always help with, but may be able to help with in the right set and setting with the right intention. I'm going to stop there because I'm rambling. Mary?
No, that was good. I liked it. Thank you for that sermon. I loved it. I agree. I think that we can't just sit here obviously and be like, don't have sex on psychedelics. That's insane. I would be the biggest hypocrite in the world if I said that, but
I won't ask you more about that.
Please don't. Thank you. Also, I have a very difficult time actually having sex on drugs. That's not something that I typically do because of just
a lot of people do.
I have a hard time. I'm just where do I put my hands? It's confusing for me. I'd rather be out.
Are these my hands?
Exactly. I'm where do I put my feet? Where's my hair?
Is that your
Where's
head?
my hair?
Is that my head?
What's happening? Yeah, I'm just exactly. I'm just confused. I'm are my teeth in my mouth? I'm just kidding. I have no idea. So it's, but at the same time, it's, you can try everything once, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, I think that people are already doing it. And I also think that you made an excellent point about the BDSM community. And I think that in general, beyond sex, in terms of just relationships in general, there is so much that we can take from the kink communities and we can take from BDSM in terms of the communication, boundaries, how to set them without feeling awkward, etc. And that, in heteronormative relationships, those types of communication mechanisms don't exist. It's awkward when you try and implement them in. So yes, all the way to studying BDSM and understanding kind of these communication strategies that you can implement in your own relationships and also in your sex life. And also if you're going to be utilizing psychedelics as a way to connect with your partner while tripping, having sex while on a drug of any kind, actually. But I think that there's a lot there. There's a lot there for us. There's a lot there for us to learn. And so thank you for bringing that up. I love that.
Yeah, totally. And I'm looking forward to getting into this in future Hot Goss episodes, hopefully with journalist and double-blind contributor Nicole Hodges.
Yeah.
Her whole thing, her whole world is psychedelics and BDSM and kink. And that is something that we've written about at Double Blind because we like to, ruffle a feather every once in a while. And we're not going to just talk about politics and drug development, folks. There's a lot of interesting things happening in psychedelics. There's so much more to say about that, but I want to make sure we have time for our final story of the day. We recently published a story written by reporter Randy Robinson. Matthew Perry. Shout out to Randy. I think this is the first story that they reported for us, and you knew them previously. Anyway, they did a great job. You headlined the story perfectly. Matthew Perry's death proves we don't know much about ketamine was the name of the story. And as a recap for people who don't know, in October, Matthew Perry, most famous for playing Chandler on the sitcom Friends, unfortunately, tragically died in his pool. And the Los Angeles coroner's report concluded that he died from the, quote, acute effects of ketamine. And in the following days, nearly every news headline that we saw at Double Blind about his death focused on ketamine, which people may or may not know has shown a lot of promise for treatment-resistant depression, among other mental health conditions, and is being administered in therapeutic contexts across the United States and the world. So we were paying very close attention to how this news was covered. And we saw headlines like an NPR headline that read, "What is ketamine, the drug tied to actor Matthew Perry's death?" The Tampa Bay Times ran, "Matthew Perry died from the effects of ketamine, autopsy report says." And then the headline at the medical news site MedPage asked, a medical site, "If ketamine is so safe, what happened to Matthew Perry?" Now, we're not diminishing that what happened to Matthew Perry is tragic. I just want to say that again, but this story really isn't about Matthew Perry. What it's about is what happens when the media perpetuates oversimplified and sometimes inaccurate narratives about drugs, especially when they're big news because they're tied to the death of a celebrity and everyone is reading the headlines and they're not reading the stories because we've already talked about what is going on with that in our culture. So you edited the story for us, Mary, and I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit more about it. I know it was a hard one to edit. You did a great job.
It was definitely a difficult story to edit because, well, first of all, I am not a ketamine expert, and I just want to put that out there. And so, to help Randy report, I had to go find some experts to really make sure that I was filling in the holes here, and also utilizing the proper language around ketamine and what potentially a lethal dose of ketamine is, which, according to experts, is still not totally known. It's not known with certainty, which is difficult because there are situations out that have happened in our country, in the United States, where people have died from very high doses of ketamine. It's complicated, it's hard, but it's not something that has been scientifically proven one way or the other, or scientifically agreed upon, rather. But, so that was difficult because people are assuming that Matthew Perry died specifically from an overdose of ketamine. Because when people read acute effects of ketamine, people are like, "Oh, he OD'd on ketamine." Okay, great. And granted, Matthew Perry was on a very high dose of ketamine. One that people are assuming that he reached that high dose of ketamine through oral supplements of ketamine, whether that's through a lozenge or whether that's through a pill kind of thing that he potentially received from a telehealth provider, which there are many, they are controversial. Double Blind, I believe, has also written about that.
Yeah, it's a whole separate conversation about these telehealth companies that are mailing people ketamine lozenges and whether that is or is not
and safe. And a lot of experts were saying that they were, if Matthew Perry was assessed properly, people probably wouldn't have sent him home with ketamine, aka a telehealth provider, maybe not sending him a lot of ketamine, essentially. But it's also unclear as to whether or not he actually received that telehealth medicine and was consuming it orally.
Yeah, he could have just bought it on the black market. I shouldn't say black market because that's not really the appropriate term these days. But
on the streets, whatever. Yeah, totally. I mean, he could have. Is it insufflation? He could have put it in his nose. It's unclear. They did find ketamine, like traces of ketamine in his digestive tract, which is what leads people to believe that he was consuming a lozenge or an oral form of ketamine. However, again, still unclear. But he had a lot of ketamine in his blood at the time that the toxicology report was taken. I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but it's like it's high. It's very high. It's in the thousands of nanograms, but it's very difficult to look at the nanogram measurement of the amount of ketamine that was in his blood versus what experts are hypothesizing is a lethal dose of ketamine. So because they are measuring it in milligrams, and the coroner's report measures his ketamine amount, the amount of ketamine in his blood in nanograms, and there is not a clean conversion there. I was trying to do the conversion, but it doesn't match up. The math isn't mathing, and I don't think that I'm the right mathematician to be putting this together. Also, I suck at math, but I was utilizing all the tools that I possibly had to try and figure that out. But I realized that it was way beyond the scope of my abilities. And also, one of the experts that we spoke to for the story said that it's a very complicated conversion formula. So yeah, so the jury is still out on what a lethal dose of ketamine is. However, like Shelby was saying prior to this, was that usually when a celebrity passes away or some big, well-known individual passes away from drugs, or drugs are just involved in their death, that's what the focus is. And for Matthew Perry specifically, it wasn't necessarily the ketamine that put him under. Many of the, or that took him out essentially. Many of the experts were saying that had he not been in a jacuzzi, had he not been in a body of water, there's a chance that Matthew Perry would still be here with us. It was the fact he was in a pool on an anesthetic dose of ketamine that put him under, that essentially, took his life. And that's a harm reduction like message to everybody that if you are going to do high doses of ketamine, do not go in a bathtub, do not go in a jacuzzi, don't go in the shower either. Just lay in your bed, lay on the grass outside, maybe lay on your side, have someone with you. Maybe don't lay on your back in case you get sick. Lay on your side. Like there are just certain things that you have to do if you're going to take a very high dose of any drug, honestly, but especially ketamine because it's anesthesia at the end of the day. So that's, and also Randy's reporting on the story was really excellent. And they talked about other celebrities who have died from consuming drugs or died from the consumption of drugs along with other things too that contributed to their death. And, he brought up Michael Jackson. There was also, we discussed talking about Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston didn't make it into the story just because it's a little more complicated than just her consuming Xanax and being in a bathtub. But again, very similar thing. Don't get in a body of water if you're going to be on downers. Just do not do it. Rappers, just read the story. Highly recommend reading the story.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, you made so many good points. And I just will say, I remember bringing this story to you in the editorial meeting after talking to my dad, who's a doctor. I don't know if I told you that was the impetus for the story, but he brought up he was the one who brought up how something similar happened in the wake of Michael Jackson's death, whereby Michael Jackson died from a mix of benzodiazepines, stimulants, and propofol. And my dad was like, as a doctor, I administer propofol all the time and it's fine. And yet a lot of the headlines were just focusing on propofol to this day. When patients come in and he wants to prescribe propofol, they are concerned about it because they remember the headlines around Michael Jackson. I also heard what kind of really was the catalyst after that conversation was shortly thereafter, I got a call from Sam Mandel, who's the CEO of Ketamine Clinics Los Angeles, which is one of the leading ketamine clinics in the country, run by his father, a prominent physician and pioneer in the psychedelic space named Steve Mandel. And he basically told us, like, this is having a real life negative impact
on patients,
on our clinic, where we have nurse practitioners that are there monitoring people's hearts, monitoring their blood pressure. We're doing a screening of their medical history. We're making sure they're not on any contraindications. We don't let them get into a car until they're like able to walk, you know? And so it's important, yes, for there to be harm reduction information out in the world, so that if people decide to do these substances on their own, which at Double Blind, we often say, you know, we're not necessarily opposed to people doing these substances outside of the clinic, which is a controversial perspective we can talk about some other time. But you have to do so with care, and you have to do so with the right information. But it's also having a real impact on patients who might benefit from these treatments in a clinical setting. So this is why we're so passionate at Double Blind about demystifying false information around drugs, because a lot of people do drugs, a lot of people do them and are fine. A lot of people also do them and benefit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that this story really is harming patients, or the all of the media hype around Matthew Perry's death really is harming patients. And specifically, it's because of the lack of nuanced reporting. And also, the lack of nuanced reporting is an effect of the fact that most people in this country are not educated in drugs or drug policy or how to use drugs more safer. They don't know these protocols and things to do, because all of that is removed from the education system and process here in the United States.
Oh, yeah. I mean, totally. And don't get me going on what's happening with all of these Google algorithm updates that they are burying all of the information that us and other sites are publishing on harm reduction, and instead soaring sites like the DEA and rehab clinics and basically anything that has a sort of dare narrative, just don't do it, to the top of Google. Because guess what happens if you tell people to just not do it? They do it anyway, and then they don't have the right information.
They take ketamine in a hot tub. That's what happens, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah.
So it's heartbreaking, actually, what happened to Matthew Perry, because he didn't have to die. And it also shows that even if you're a celebrity, and even if you are someone who has used drugs for many, 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 many years, like Matthew Perry, you still sometimes don't know the protocols and safety around how to use them better, or in a harm reduction way, or even just considering harm reduction at all. So it's unfortunate and it's sad.
Totally,
I wish he had a coach. Like I wish he had read Double Blind. It really wouldn't have taken. He would have just had to Google what is ketamine, how to take ketamine, and scroll down a little bit, since, Double Blind might not be at the top of Google anymore. But it wouldn't have taken a lot. And I just wish that generation of people who are typically kind of branded with the drug or the drug war dare narrative would study a little bit more. And I think that everybody who does drugs should study. If you're going to do these things, they are dangerous inherently. Like, you have to kind of study and know them before jumping all the way in, so.
And the need for harm reduction is why the next segment on this podcast is all about answering people's tripping questions. First, we have to provide a little disclaimer, which, in case you didn't pick up on this yet from the last, 45 minutes or so of us talking, we are not doctors. We're journalists. So yes, we have reported a lot on psychedelics. Yes, we also have done psychedelics, but we're not giving you individualized medical advice. And we still recommend that you do your own homework and read Double Blind, where we have interviewed lots of people that actually are doctors. Anyway, Mary, why don't you kick us off with some questions from the community today?
Okay, perfect. So question number 1 is, I have been microdosing shrooms for a while now. I feel like it's helping, but I'm not really sure. Should I try acid? Should I take more shrooms? And that's it. That's the question. And that's an age-old question, actually, I feel like.
Yeah.
Is my microdose actually working?
Right.
I think many of us always wonder that, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was going to say, personally, I am someone who can feel small doses of mushrooms. So I feel them. I feel small doses, which in turn kind of lends me to feeling microdoses. But I'm not tripping. I'm not experiencing something that is lifting me off the ground, taking me through the stars. It's not like that. If you are wondering if you should continue, I think there is, like, just the way that things are in the psychedelic space, I think there's room for experimentation. If you're wondering about LSD, if you are wondering about mushrooms, and you're wondering what works best for you, the only way really to discover that is to try. And also assessing why you want to microdose in the first place. Is it because of anxiety? Is it because of depression? Or is it because you want to be more creative? Or is it because you just hear everybody doing it and you are interested? All of which are perfect reasons to discover and explore. But it's worth noting that sometimes these substances work better for different things. Like if you have anxiety, maybe LSD isn't something that you would want to take it for. If you are trying to enhance your creativity, maybe LSD is something that you would like to microdose. If you are depressed, perhaps small doses of mushrooms every day or every other day, or on some sort of protocol with one day off at least, is something that you can do. But it ultimately is up to you, and it's ultimately you can figure it out upon exploration to figure out what works best for you.
Yeah, I really appreciate the emphasis on experimentation and playing, because with psychedelics in general, and microdosing is no exception, it really is about figuring out what works best for you, which is a little frustrating because there's no plug and play when it comes to this stuff. Every single person is different and has different needs. But we definitely, it's definitely very common for people to say, I don't know if it's working. And so just kind of reiterating what Mary said, which is that if you're like, whoa, it's working, you're not microdosing. Jim Fadiman, who is a friend of Double Blind and is considered sort of the father of modern microdosing, has often said, if you're seeing stars, if, you're seeing anything that is remotely classically psychedelic visually, or anything really sort of profound is happening on an emotional and psychological level, is not a microdose. So really, the best thing you can do if you're unsure about whether it's working for you is probably first to slowly increase your dose. But, obviously the risk you take is that one day you mean to microdose and whoopsie, it took a little too much and it's not a microdose. A microdose and now you can't go to work. Considered 1/10 to 1/20th of a full dose. So on mushrooms, that's going to be, some people go under 0.1 grams of dried psilocybin mushrooms, but usually you're going to have to start around 0.1. And then they say, blogs, etc., that a microdose goes all the way up to 0.5 grams of mushroom. Yeah. I don't think most people at 0.5, that's not a microdose. So you should start with 0.1, 0.15, 0.2, 0.3. And, if you're stretching up above that 0.3 range, and same goes for acid, if you're going up over like a third of a full dose of acid, you better have nothing planned that day and be somewhere safe and at home where you're comfortable. Like, don't plan to go pick up the kids or have a Zoom meeting because I've been there, done that on a Zoom call where I'm outside talking on a Zoom call. I'm like, the clouds are not, there's no way the clouds are actually doing that. So
also been there.
Yeah, been there, done that. But also, I think that if you've increased the dose and it's just still not really what you want it to be and it's not working for you, then sure, you can try acid, and kind of go through that same process. But generally speaking, as with all changes that you're making in your life, you want to do it for a long enough period of time that you can feel what the effects are. think of your body like a scientific experiment. We all learned about that in like elementary school, right? You don't want to mess with too many variables at once, or you don't know like what's doing what. So generally, like sticking with whatever you decide you're going to do for like 30 days, maybe 6 weeks, and journaling and paying attention to what's happening for you is a good thing to do. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard to track what's benefiting you and what's not. So there's a lot more to say about that, but I will also just say that Double Blind has a microdosing class. So if you're interested in actually going through the whole process of figuring out what substance, figuring out your protocol, increasing over time, tracking, all of that, we'll walk you through it. And you know, the wonderful thing about signing up for our class is that the proceeds are going to go to making the podcast and the magazine and the other things we do possible. So question number 2, I feel like my partner would really benefit from tripping. She has so much anxiety and stress, and it seeps into our relationship. Psychedelics have changed my life, but she's resistant. How do I convince her to trip? We hear this all the time from people, and it's not, oftentimes it's about a romantic partner, but also it's like, I think my mom should do psychedelics. I think my best friend should do psychedelics. You know who really needs to do psychedelics? My boss. Most people's bosses need to do psychedelics. Don't tell your boss to do psychedelics, though. You might get reported to HR, unless you work for Double Blind. Anyway,
I think my boss needs to do LSD a little bit more. Just saying.
Rude. You're not wrong. So what I'm gonna say about this is that, unfortunately, I know it's really, really hard to accept this when you love someone and your life has been changed by psychedelics and you just like want to help someone you love and you see that they're struggling and they're coming up against themselves again and again and again. Because it is true that one of the greatest things about psychedelics is that they can break patterns that we can't seem to get out of ourselves, habitual ways of thinking and feeling and being, right? Which oftentimes is what is the kind of the source of suffering for people, that they know that they think too much or they obsess or they this or they that or whatever, or they're anxious or they worry, but they just can't seem to stop. Unfortunately, if you convince someone to do a psychedelic, they will probably not have the trip that you want them to have. It just has to be a personal calling. And so that means you can like talk to them about your experiences and you can give them a copy of Double Blind. But yeah, don't convince someone you love to do psychedelics.
I also think that there's an element of resistance that comes with trying to convince someone to do anything. At least for me, anytime anybody is trying to pressure me to do anything, I'm like, fuck you, no. So yeah. even if it's going to be good for me, it's just like my nature. And I'm not saying everybody's like that.
Human nature, to be honest. Yeah, like the more you push, the more there's like
resistance.
Pushing. And it doesn't.
Like opposite magnets, you know, opposite ends of the magnet or whatever the fuck that is. Yeah. So I think there is no way to convince somebody to do anything. Not do their taxes, not do a psychedelic, not walk their dog. You know, like you can't convince anybody to do anything. But what you can do is talk to them, be open and there when they have questions, and maybe they will come around. You can create the environment for somebody to want to come around. And that's like all you really have. And there's also a limit there. You know, don't be manipulative either. But, you know, you can talk to them about it. You can talk to them about your experience and answer questions honestly and fully and truly that you have. You can even express that you think that it would help them. But I think also being compassionate and just being like, whenever you are ready, I can't wait, you know, and being excited about that. And
know that I am here for you if and when you are ready.
And like, be like, one of those, be kind, like have a aura and energy about you that's like, I cannot wait for that day. But also it is so okay that you don't want to do it right now. When that day comes, like, I'm your girl, I'm your guy, I'm your friend, you know, whatever. Like, I'm your lover, let's fucking go, you know, kind of thing. And make it exciting for them when they do come to you, or if they do come to you and they do want to do it, make it a thing, make it exciting, make it lovable, make it enjoyable, be excited. Don't, meet them with like, oh, finally, kind of thing, or any weird attitude that sometimes can come out, or like, oh, now you're ready, or like, look who finally came around, like be very excited, like meet them with that like child wonder as well, because ultimately you are going to be with them when they are doing something for the first time. And when you become an adult, there are a few first times anymore. So celebrate it, and celebrate your partner for where she's at, or where they are at. Sorry, don't know if it's a boy or girl, or anybody else. But yeah, meet them where they're at and be excited about it. And I think that with the proper enthusiasm and support, and knowing that they can trust you and that you're ready to go whenever they are, is all you really can do. And I think that creates a nice environment for them to know that they're not being pressured. And yeah, maybe they'll come around.
Completely. That was great advice. Thanks so much to our community for submitting questions. And if you have a question that you want us to answer about tripping or about psychedelics in general, then you can submit your questions. Email us at magichour@doubleblindmag.com. We would love to hear from you. Mary, before we wrap up, I'd like to invite you to do a little bit of meditation with us. Is that something that you're up for?
I would love to, Shelby. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So just for some context, we begin all of Double Blind's workshops with meditation, and we actually begin all of Double Blind's internal meetings with meditation. We jokingly say that we jokingly call our chief technology officer, Max, our chief transcendence officer, because he leads us in meditations before our meetings. But the reason we do this is because what we learn again and again on psychedelics is that, we are comprised of mind, body, spirit. Maybe you don't believe in spirit, but certainly mind and body, regardless of what your sort of spiritual outlook is on the world. And we've talked about a lot of things, and we want to take a moment to digest all of these ideas and just become aware of what is alive for us before we go back into our day. So let's just breathe for a couple minutes together, and then we will wrap up.
Hello, welcome. I'm Sky Weaver, resident facilitator at Double Blind. I invite you to come into your body for a moment here. So we're going to just allow our spine to move a little bit. So see if you can just kind of wiggle your spine. That's it. Back and forth. Yeah. And then on your next inhale, see if you can bring your heart open. Opening that heart, pulling those shoulder blades back and arching the back. And on the exhale, allowing that heart to fold forward, stretching the back of the body. Nice. And inhale coming up. Good. Next inhale, lengthen the spine, engage the belly, and twisting the shoulder and the heart, and eventually the head towards the right. Deep breath here. And your exhale, softening back to the front. Nice. Wiggle a little bit. That's it. Inhale. Engage the belly, and we're going to twist to the left this time. Spine, heart, shoulder, neck. That's it. Deep breath here. On your exhale, release. That's it. And if you feel like it, maybe making little circles with your spine around to the right. Nice, like your spine is a big jump rope. Nice and gentle. That's it. And exhale, wiggle, 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 wiggle. That's it. Welcome back to your body. Thanks for being here.
I'm really grateful for these moments that we're able to take at Double Blind that help us recenter. My life needs it badly right now. So thank you. I appreciate that that's a part of all of this, Shelby.
Yeah, of course. And we live in a culture and an economic paradigm that places so much emphasis on productivity. And I don't think that
So
everything
true.
has to be a means to an end. But I will say, for those of you out there who think you don't have time to meditate or breathe, that actually studies have shown that even just a minute or two of breath work and meditation can increase creativity, increase focus, increase all of these things that we might have difficulty accessing when we're moving 500 million miles an hour.
Girl, that's so true. Fuck. So true.
Mm.
Thank you. Seriously, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. My body thanks you. Like being able to tap back in, put my spirit back inside of my body, feel embodied again, you know.
Mm.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've covered a lot of ground today, and I know you'll be back, but is there anything else that you wanted to share before we jump off? You know, anything else that's sort of alive for you now regarding the psychedelic movement, stories that you've been editing, conversations you've been hearing in the field? And if not, then that's fine. And you just tell the people where they can find you.
Yes. Well, my tip always, the last things always on my mind are, if you are looking to try psychedelics, just start low and go slow. You can build from where you start, but if you start too big, not retract.
Right. You can take more, but you can't take less.
Absolutely. So just keep that in mind when anybody is offering you anything. Also, test your drugs. I know it's a pain in the ass, but we live in a world where powdery substances and, I mean, shoot, gummies, everything, they're not totally, they don't contain what maybe you think they contain. So test your stuff, be safe, start low, go slow. And if you would like any more of those tips, you can find me on social media. You can find me at Mary Prankster. That is spelled Maryyy Prankster.
Thanks so much to everybody for listening. And if you want to reach out to us, you have thoughts about what we talked about today, you have suggestions about who should come on, there are many ways to hit us up. Email us at magichour@doubleblindmag.com or visit us at doubleblindmag on TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all the socials. I also want to give a shout out to the amazing folks at Human Content who are producing this podcast and helping make it possible. They do a lot of great podcasts other than this one, so if you're an audiophile, check them out on Instagram and TikTok at Human Content Pods. Thanks to all of the great listeners leaving wonderful feedback and awesome reviews. If you subscribe and comment on your favorite podcasting app or on YouTube, we might give you a shout out. You can watch full video episodes of this every week on our YouTube channel at Double Blind. Our executive producers are Aaron Corney, Rob Goldman, Shanti Brooke, and Alex Field from the Double Blind team, who also edits the show. Our engineer is Jason Portizo. To learn more about the Double Blind Magic Hour program disclaimer and ethics policy and submission verification and licensing terms, you can go to doubleblindmag.com/magic-hour or reach us at magic-hour@doubleblindmag.com with any questions, concerns, or inspirational quotes. Double Blind Magic Hour is a Human Content and Double Blind production. And now let's take you out on Ewe by Fabiano Nascimento. Thanks for watching. And if you're thinking, gosh, I really need more Double Blind Magic Hour in my life, well, you can start listening now by clicking on that playlist button right over there. New episodes are out every Monday, so please subscribe and join us each week on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.